Maryland landlords, at least their lobbyists, their association, are of the opinion that landlords should be able to get rid of problem tenants as easily and quickly as possible. I should also say that we have incredibly low eviction court costs. Landlord pays less than $100 to file an action here. In New York City, that would be many hundreds of dollars. Most cities actually try to keep the cost of filing an eviction up to deter people from using the courts and to try to get them to settle outside a court. Maryland system keeps the cost low, the speed high, and all I can say is it just appears to be set up for fast and immediate collection, landlords like it that way, and we have not been able to change that yet.
Maybe the judges in the court system
What's that?
is the problem. The judges in the court system.
There's that
They
too.
like it too.
Oh, there's that too. We don't have enough judges. If you've ever been to the district court, they have rats. The court buildings, the support of the courts themselves is very poor. And that's, I would hate to be a judge in rent court. You're put in an impossible situation. And yet that's the way it is.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about the judges in rent court. Like
Mhm.
you were saying on this paper,
Mhm.
how they tell the tenants to not forgive anything but the rent.
Yeah.
When it seems like that's false information from what you were saying.
Yeah.
And then I was gonna ask, the only thing I know about law is like from TV shows and movies, so I really don't understand how it works.
Okay, well,
But
it's not the TVs and movies.
Isn't that like
Well,
false
okay,
information?
what is happening here though is judges are gods in their own courtroom. And they get to run the show the way they want. If you don't like it, you can appeal their case. And we do that. But the Maryland District Court gets appealed to the Circuit Court. And a Circuit Court appeal, if they say the judge was wrong to do that, it's not binding on any other judges. It was only binding on that particular case. To get a binding decision on all judges, you have to go to the Court of Appeals of Maryland, which we try to do. Whenever we appeal a case, though, that looks like it's a winner, they'll drop it because they don't want to have a decision that affects all landlords. So it's even hard for us, even with a good case, to get in front of the court. Because you have to have two parties fighting, to get to court. Some courts will be more assertive, like the chief administrative judges will be more assertive in trying to get the judges into line. But I will say, in my 20 years of watching the Maryland District Court, they just don't do that. You have to overturn the decision by an appeal is the only way that the judge is going to reform the behavior. We work with a number of tenant organizing groups. We do have, in fact, it's not really active right now, but we've had a blog of having people do court watch, where they observe judges, and they have to be trained to understand what's actually going on here. But starting to, frankly, expose and shame some of the judges' behavior, because sometimes it's just really awful. And I don't want to cast all judges like this. There's a range. Some judges are really trying very hard to do as best they can in very bad circumstances, and others are just almost mean. So, yeah. Well, let me go on to a couple solutions, okay? One is, as you can guess, what we call the right to counsel in evictions. And that would be the idea that tenants should be able, okay, you all know that the thing, if you've been charged with a crime, if you can't afford a lawyer, one will be appointed to you, Miranda warnings you hear on TV all the time. That only applies to criminal actions. It does not apply to civil actions. There are many things that are, I think, just as important as spending a night in jail. For instance, if you're about to lose your house, your child, your job, your health care, there are a lot of civil issues that you do not have a right to a lawyer. And that's the problem then, is why the existing lawyers networks we can't meet the need because there's no right to a lawyer. That you might get lucky to get a lawyer, but you don't have a right to a lawyer. So one of the things the Public Justice Center does is run the National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel. We're working in most states around the country to try to establish rights of counsel in various types of cases, not all cases, but specific ones. The thing that has really taken off recently in the last like 5 years has been a right to counsel in eviction cases. And because of Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, and a lot of things going on, people are realizing that the cost of eviction to society is very high. When people are on the street, in homeless shelters, in hospitals, missing school, missing work, homelessness is expensive for the society. And there's kind of this growing recognition that if we kept people in stable housing, a lot of other social costs would decrease, as well as be better for the people themselves. This came to fruition first in New York City, 3 years ago now. New York City has the first right to counsel law in the country. And now all tenants, actually, even regardless of income, they don't even do income screening, all tenants that show up in rent court in New York City are provided a lawyer. And what they found, and then I should say, this has been a real role. New York City, San Francisco, Newark, Cleveland, and Philadelphia all have right to counsel laws now, all within the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm proud to say my organization has been leading the backup center that writes those laws, but also due credit. It's the activists on the ground in all of these places that are actually getting the votes out and doing that kind of stuff. That's not us. But there's another 10 cities probably that are considering it right now. Baltimore actually is we're organizing locally to try to get a right to counsel. And here's why. Studies have shown, we have a fair number of studies on this now. Studies have shown that if you have a lawyer, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to maintain possession, meaning avoid eviction. If you have a lawyer, 2 to 3 times, 300% better chance of keeping your home. You have people with lawyers only default at 1/3 the rate of people who don't have lawyers, and that's understandable. There's not just the maintaining possession, though. There's the dollar value involved in the judgment. So if you're being sued for $1,500 rent, say, if you have a lawyer, you have a 200 to 300% chance of reducing that amount significantly, or of the judgment being turned and have a judgment against the landlord rather than against the tenant. So the idea of keeping more money in tenants' pockets, keeping them in the housing, and with more money, they can pay the rent. and hopefully the property will get fixed up too. So the public cost of providing a lawyer is cheaper than the public cost of people getting evicted unjustly. That's what it comes down to. And we've got a number of studies on that. So that's a real exciting thing that's going on, and I think it's probably the most concrete present effort that is going on. There are some other solutions that I want to briefly mention. One, eviction law reform. That's something the Public Justice Centers is very involved in every year. And that's basically to try to increase tenant due process in court so that they actually get to make their case. But again, without a lawyer, that's always going to be tough. We also support, though, increased judges, better courthouses, more facilities. If you're going to claim to be a country that is, a country that runs on laws, well, you have to provide a legal infrastructure to do that. Another big kind of area of solution is increasing the supply of affordable housing. As you can see, a major issue here is that, housing costs this and tenants have that amount of money. Well, as long as that situation exists, you're always going to have problems. One way to do it is to increase the amount of affordable housing. It used to be that the federal government was the major source of money for building public housing and for subsidizing rents through what was then called the Section 8 program and is now called Housing Choice Vouchers. The federal government has gone like that in terms of funding for that. So that the federal government is practically out of the business of housing at this point. They are not a practical solution, at least under current politics. Maryland and Baltimore City have done several things. The Public Justice Center was one of the major allies that got a law passed several years ago called the Affordable Housing Trust Act. And that's where the city, Baltimore City government has committed $20 million a year to go into affordable housing. It is run by an independent board that the PJC, among others, is on that to determine where to put this $20 million a year. And one place that we are trying to put a lot of the money into is what is called community land trusts. And these are neighborhood organizations that own the land and the building, but then they sell it or rent it to a community member. But the community member cannot put the house on the market just on the regular market. They have to sell it back to the community at an appraised value, and then the community and the homeowners share whatever equity value is. So it's a way of sharing equity, but it's also a way of keeping the house out of the speculative rental market and housing market, and for the community to control the land itself. It has been shown, there's some really great community land trusts, like one in Roxbury in Boston, and a number of others around the country, that it keeps the housing so much more stable. People don't leave, and they don't go into foreclosure, and they don't get evicted for non-payment of rent at anywhere the rate of in the private market. So that's one way we're really trying to increase that in Maryland. We actually have 5 functioning community land trusts in Baltimore City right now, at a very, very small scale, but we're trying to gear that up more. Another way to deal with housing affordability, you can make the housing more affordable, or you can get the tenants to have more money to be able to afford the housing. This is the other side of the equation. Traditionally, federal housing choice vouchers were the means of subsidizing rent, increasing the amount of money that the tenant has available to pay for housing. In Maryland, we have the Rental Assistance Program, RAP, which at a much lesser level also will subsidize a tenant's rent to be able to ensure that they have enough money to pay the rent. There is actually, yes, ma'am.
In the city of Baltimore or the state of Maryland, are landlords allowed to say move out there in Section 8?
Very good question. This has been the longest running legislative battle the Public Justice Center has been involved in. Currently in Maryland as a whole, landlords are allowed to discriminate against Section 8 holders or other forms of income, Social Security income, disability income. The disability rights community is very upset about this too, as well as poor people's advocates. But in certain areas, we have passed laws that prohibit that kind of discrimination, and it's called source of income discrimination, is the phrase we use. Baltimore City, and now Baltimore County, Frederick City, Howard County, and Montgomery County all have laws prohibiting the source of income discrimination. And we've been working on that for 20 years. Oops, I'm sorry. And so we have not been able to be successful at statewide level, but we are more successful at a county by county level. So that's what we've been doing there. One excellent federal program that helps put more money into people's pocket is the earned income credit that you can get, that working people who are, and I should say, by the way, 2/3 of people who live in poverty work full-time for a living. It's not that they're not working, it's that the work doesn't pay enough to get you out of poverty, and it doesn't pay enough to get you to be able to pay the rent. So the earned income credit is a way of giving working people some money back, and that has been shown to be an incredibly effective program in terms of channeling money directly from the tenant into the local market and keeping things stable. It's a great program. Two other things I'll say that we could do more with is increasing the minimum wage. The reality is minimum wage doesn't get you out of poverty. And there's something wrong about we say that we value work in this country, but we don't value it enough to pay for it. Another thing we could do that would put a lot more money back into people's pockets and avoid more evictions is stop wage discrimination against women and people of color. It's no accident that almost all people in rent court are, and I think the statistics are here, 94% of them are black, 78% of them are women. Almost all of them have children. That's the group that suffers the most from eviction. It's also the group that is most prone to discrimination in wages. So if we just start paying women right, that would help a lot. That's easier said than done. So those are kind of the major solutions that we're kind of working on. What do you think? Questions?
So are you saying that housing subsidies have shifted from Section 8 federal HUD mechanisms to state level?
The feds have gotten more and more out of the business and have put a lot less money in. The states are still there and doing something, but not nearly at the level that the federal government used to do. So the overall pot of money going into housing subsidies is way, way down.
So, and when did that transition happen, or when did HUD? do
It
that?
started in, I'm gonna say the late 80s, and has been a trend now for many years and over many generations, over many administrations. Yeah.
So now do you have to have like a serious health condition, you can qualify for Section 8? Or is that-
No, you generally, well, there are some priorities. Actually, if you've been homeless, that's a priority. Disability is a priority. There may be some others. The problem, though, is that you get on a waiting list, and I think the last I heard, the waiting list in Baltimore City was 2.5 years, and they shut the waiting list down, because there's just not enough vouchers to go around. It's kind of pointless to apply. Other thoughts?
So in terms of advocacy,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in regard to that? Because it would seem, for those of us who have prevent homelessness,
Mm-hmm.
advocacy is critical. But it sounds like these systems are pretty entrenched. I mean, the judges,
Yeah.
that would be a place I'd start.
Well, at least the way the Public Justice Center is approaching this is, one, bringing litigation in cases that actually establish law and instruct the judges on what to do. Secondly, we're working in what we call administrative advocacy, which is within the court system itself to try to, well, let me give you a couple of examples. Over the last years, we have changed many of the forms that tenants get to advise them about where to get legal aid, to put them into Spanish and other languages, to make them more plain English, things that will help internally on how the system works. And also to try to get the judges to have, we have not been successful at this yet, but one thing we're proposing is to have a common script that all judges read at the beginning of the day in rent court, so the tenants are told the same thing. And what they're told is actually legal. We have not gotten the judges to agree to that yet, but we're trying. And then in Annapolis, changing the laws. Now, many of the laws that we have been advocating for are, what I call the due process protections, giving tenants more time, helping them to be able to present their case. Those we have had many successes on, but that's a long uphill fight. The funding issues, I honestly, those are the huge issues. I mean, money makes a big difference, but we don't have a real lock on it. Oh, and then the other thing I should say is the right to counsel movement nationwide. And here's something, it hasn't really gotten off the ground yet in Baltimore, but there will come a time, probably within the next year or two, where we'll make a serious push on the right to counsel in the Maryland General Assembly, or perhaps before the Baltimore City Council. And for that to work, you not only need lawyers and policy people, you really need organizations and people on the street writing letters and showing up at hearings. And we need tenant organizations who can do that. And we have some that are kind of building up, but that's somewhere, for instance, that students could easily get involved in the advocacy on that. In fact, it'd be great if we had students like, writing papers and stuff, that kind of thing. I don't know if that answered your question, Lee. There's not an easy way to slot people in right now, I'm afraid.
So what about advocacy for the tenants to have a real sort of what I call education sessions? This is the way you need to deal with this. You've just gotten a notice.
Yeah.
And come down to the office.
Yeah.
Group sessions.
We and others try to do that a fair amount. I will say this though, and this is a little discouraging. I think within the legal aid community 20 years ago, we realized we can't provide enough lawyers to actually represent everybody in court, but if we could educate tenants better in what their rights are and how to make presentations, that would be good. And we have put historically a lot of effort into tenant education. The studies, though, are showing that that doesn't change that much. You get a bump up, certainly a better educated tenant, but many tenants are not going to be able, for a variety of reasons, it's not realistic to be able to put together the evidence, to make the presentation, to do that in a court that is frankly hostile, where there's 50 people watching, and it's an intimidating environment. And yes, there are some tenants that will be benefited by that, but the studies we're seeing are showing that as long as the legal system is as it is, you need a lawyer. I mean, it's kind of, if you have the money to afford a lawyer, would you go into court without one? No, that'd be crazy. And so I think that's why we've really switched to kind of the right to counsel approach. And the way we can win a right to counsel approach, because it's not, believe me, it's not like lawyers are so popular that everybody's going to say, oh yeah, let's have more lawyers in the country. That'll solve all our problems. It's because of the cost effectiveness that we can show that having a lawyer is cheaper for society. Having a taxpayer subsidized lawyer is cheaper than having hospitals and schools and all of the other things that are provided.
It just seems that it's such a waste.
Yeah.
And it does create many more homes.
Yeah, and it is so, you guys are seeing this in all your classes, but eviction is like one of the most destabilizing things in people's lives. It is totally like right up there with watching your friend get murdered in terms of like what kind of traumatic effect it will have on people and their families. And it's also, yeah, and we deal with this, another of our projects actually, we work with homeless kids in school. And oftentimes, and not always legally, when a kid loses a house, they lose an address, and then the school district doesn't want them in the school district because they say you don't live here. And it's a way, frankly, I think, of excluding poor people from public education. That's illegal. We have sued Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Prince George's, and Montgomery County, and won all of them, and have required that the law on this is that if you become homeless, the child stays in the last school. And because it's been shown that keeping educational stability is very important for a kid. I remember the statistic that every time a kid moves schools for whatever reason, you lose effectively 6 months of education. So think of some of the kids being sued 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year for eviction. If they're actually being evicted twice a year, they're not going anywhere in school. They're regressing at that point. So again, from a school perspective, trying to keep kids stable and in school is very important.
And the trauma, and
Yeah.
there's life trauma.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yes, ma'am?
One of my questions. So then, the developer side, how can we, like, one of the problems, one of the solutions is
Uh-huh.
more affordable housing.
Uh-huh.
It's expensive too, to like build properties and to
Yes.
maintain them.
Yeah.
Whether they be individual units or apartment complexes. Kind of as you pointed out at the beginning, to run like high quality, healthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's less profitable.
Yes. Yeah.
So what system changes are implemented to like tip it?
Um,
The balance of.
That's a good question, and I can say something about it, but quite honestly, it's outside of my expertise too, so. There have been proposals to have like a small landlord's fund that they can borrow from in order to put the money back into the housing. For instance, a number of years ago, there was some federal money and city money that came together in a weatherization program, and it allowed landlords to borrow money from this fund to weatherize their house for the rental, which would be good for everybody, frankly. But particularly for smaller landlords, they don't have the capital to invest. The larger landlords can do that. It's more of a business model, and they just need to put more into it. Again, there used to be federal subsidies for building housing. Not really anymore. The only thing going on right now is called the low, LIHTC, Low Income Housing Tax Credit. And I don't even understand how this works, but you put together a funding package and the investors get a tax credit if it's used to build low income housing. That's a program that does work, and I can imagine that could be expanded.
When it comes to the terminology surrounding housing, I often get confused, like even public housing, right? So in Baltimore, a lot of the sites like Perkins Homes you talked about in the past couple of weeks, that's all getting knocked down. It's supposed to be, I don't know if it's like going to be affordable housing or what's gonna happen, but they relocate people.
Yeah.
But is that housing Section 8 housing or what was?
All right, and I'm out of time, so I'm gonna make this real quick. There's a couple different housing types. There's traditional public housing that the feds built and the city owns. And people who are in traditional housing typically pay a third of their income for the rent, and the government pays the rest. Then there's Section 8 housing, which could be a specific building. Everybody in that building gets Section 8, or it could be Section 8 certificates, which you can take to private landlords who agree to you. And all of them, the formula is the same. The tenant pays about a third of their rent, a third of their income is rent, and the government pays the balance. The Section 8 certificates have now kind of morphed into what are called housing choice vouchers, okay? But that's the origin of that program. So it's a little confusing because when you say public housing, that could be any public money that goes into housing, and that's a range of programs. Okay. I gotta quit. Thank you.